Hello. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about compassion, and I want to start with some definitions actually. One definition I found online reads sympathetic pity and concern for the sufferings or misfortune of others. Now, I didn't really like the wording of that one because although I looked up pity too, and it's defined as the feeling of sorrow and compassion caused by the suffering and misfortune of others. But it seems like it has a negative connotation, like looking down on someone. Is that how other people feel it with that word? Yeah. Something else I found says compassion literally means to suffer together. Among emotion researchers, it is defined as the feeling that arises when you are confronted with another's suffering and feel motivated to relieve that suffering. Now, this is a little more in line with how the definition of compassion I know in Buddhism, but not exactly. So the Buddhist definition of compassion is wanting someone to be free of suffering and its causes. And the way compassion is defined and used in the English language usually means that the object of the compassion has to be somebody else. And that's not necessarily so in Buddhism. We say we can have compassion for ourselves. Um, in fact, in the Buddhist sense, wanting oneself to be free of the suffering of samsara, what we call determination to be liberated, or people use the word renunciation, that is a form of compassion for oneself. And yesterday we heard Venerable Tarpa say that the Buddha said of all our perceptions, remembering death and impermanence are supreme. And actually, these are related topics. All the topics in the Dharma are interrelated. Everything's interrelated. So in order to develop compassion for someone, we have to recognize that they are suffering. And death is one of the more obvious forms of suffering that we see. But sentient beings suffer in many ways, and we don't necessarily always recognize those ways of suffering. And the Sanskrit term dukkha is what's usually translated as suffering. And it's more along the lines of unsatisfactory and includes much more than the ouch kind of suffering. So our lives in cyclic existence simply lack lasting satisfaction and happiness. By misperceiving impermanent things as permanent, we set ourselves up for suffering. We become attached to what brings us pleasant feelings in the moment and are surprised and disappointed when they don't continue to bring us pleasant feelings, or when they are gone, or they change, or we change, and the thrill is gone. Let's see. The topic of suffering is a big one, and I'm not going to get into all the different kinds of suffering. But if we don't develop some understanding or recognition of suffering and its causes, then we won't develop the determination for liberation. And if we don't develop the determination to liberate ourselves from the sufferings of cyclic existence, we won't develop that attitude towards others. So we really need to be able to recognize suffering in order to come up with developing compassion. I have a quote from the book Words of My Perfect Teacher. I think that's where I got this. If your mind has not been affected by thinking about the way you yourself wander in cyclic existence, then when you think about these modes of suffering in other sentient beings, there is no way that you as a beginner can find their suffering unbearable. So in order to develop compassion, we have to develop a balanced and kind concern for ourselves. And then thinking we are worthless won't lead to compassion, and the other extreme of arrogance also gets in the way of that. So we need a middle way approach, a compassion for all sentient beings that includes ourselves, because we too are sentient beings. And compassion can have a profound effect on our minds and our Dharma practice. And this is more what I really want to talk about is without compassion, we won't be able to overcome the self-centered thought that this self-centered attitude feeds our afflictions. And we'll find our progress on the path obstructed. The sutra that perfectly encapsulates the Dharma says, "Let those who desire Buddhahood not train in many dharmas, but only one." Which one? Great compassion. Those who have great compassion possess all the Buddha's teachings as if it were in the palm of their hand. And I don't think this means to throw out all the other teachings. It means that great compassion supports all our other practices. Ethical conduct is practiced by not harming sentient beings, not harming others and ourselves. But who with great compassion would want to harm others? And so through cultivating compassion, we train in the Buddhist teachings on ethical conduct and are protected from producing the causes for suffering of lower rebirths for ourselves in the future. And compassion can lead us to develop uncontrived generosity, simply wanting to give what is needed to relieve suffering. And in short, compassion can lead us in the proper direction through our own inner attitude. That's a very wonderful attitude. And for sure, compassion needs to be coupled with wisdom. But compassion can be a great motivation, inspiring us to study and meditate and contemplate and reflect in order to increase our ability to be able to benefit others and eradicate their suffering. Compassion can lead to bodhicitta, can lead to the great resolve, which is the determination to remove the suffering of others, of all others, and to bodhicitta, the aspiration to become fully awakened so that we can have the best ability to be able to lead others to freedom from suffering. And this is indispensable in order to become a Buddha. There are no Buddhas who have not developed bodhicitta. Thus our own awakening depends on others, depends on all sentient beings, each and every one of them. So when dealing with people that I have seen or labeled as difficult, I started working with trying to see their kindness of offering me the opportunity to practice patience, the opportunity to practice being mindful of my own reactions, of mental, physical, and verbal actions. And I did find seeing difficult situations as opportunities helpful to me. I also practice seeing difficult people suffering when somebody's doing something I feel negative, or if I feel they're coming at me in a negative way, I try to see their suffering and be concerned with their suffering and to develop compassion. And I found this a more effective practice for myself personally. And finding this effective through repeatedly practicing this, then I was able to start seeing this benefit of the kindness of this person, the opportunity that was being offered. And so that practice became more entwined with that and more beneficial. And also through being aware of their suffering and their pain and my own reactions, I became more aware of the difficulties that I was bringing to situations and that my reactions were causing more suffering for myself and others. And then that if I responded harshly or defensively, then I would bring more suffering to the situation. And if I reacted gently and with a concern for the other person, that often diffused a lot of the negativities in the situation. And it's a big part of what I've been thinking about, is how compassion affects our own minds. How we can, if we can develop this, then it's so beneficial for all our practices. And although there are many attitudes and behaviors that are affecting my own change, bringing about changes in my mind. There's a lot of practices and different things I might be using, but such as just trying to be more aware of my mind and aware of the disadvantages of the afflictions and such. But really, I really wanted to do this talk about, because I see how powerful compassion is in transforming our minds. And from the words of my perfect teacher, I want to end with a quote: is, "Always take the lowest place, wear simple clothes, help all other beings as much as you can. In everything you do, simply work at developing love and compassion until they have become a fundamental part of you."